Welcome back to class, everybody, with your host, the King. It's a lovely day in our sandy, bloody neighborhood. I've got some daggers, some other teaching implements. I'm fully loaded. So let's go ahead and get down to the lesson plan, all right? Today is about thrusting weapons and other piercing weapons. Piercing weapons were meant to get through armor that slashing weapons typically couldn't. Things like hauberks and chainmails, really thick scale mails and brigantines. Uh, Stuff like that would oftentimes glance or bounce blades, especially chainmail. Chainmail was notorious for being difficult to slash through without that infamous inwards curve or without axe blades. Now, axes, they get through all kinds of armor, but it can always be aided by a spike on one end just to really punch a hole because the smaller the surface area, all right, the more force behind it, the easier it is to get through a surface. So, let's get down to the brass tacks. We'll start today with our daggers, and then we'll move down the road that way, and then you'll see what I'm packing. So first, I want to start with a dagger that is infamous for its crimes against the Geneva Convention. This tri-tip rondel dagger. Now, if I can get this thing to levitate for us here for a second. What makes this thing so deadly, as you can see, is that it's a pyramid, all right? Now, that meant that its wounds were nearly impossible to seal shut. So when this thing stabbed and pulled out that triangular wound it left, there was no way to sew that in time to actually keep the person alive. It's the reason why bayonets are no longer allowed to be used in war, because the triangular wounds were just too difficult. You'd bleed out long before you ever got any kind of help. After that, we were going back to a fan favorite, came back for another episode, and just as shy, the Chris. So the wavy design, as we talked about in the last episode, allowed it to slice a lot better, but it also means that the stab wounds are going to be wider because the blade is creating a wider profile. Now, while this wouldn't help it pierce armor, it would definitely help make a stab wound far more lethal. Because it's going to be a wider cut, it's going to bleed a lot more. So this is a nasty bit of work in both regards on slicing and stabbing. Next, we're going to go something for the ladies. I just heard that. Straight into the ground. Holy shit. You're sharp. This is a hair needle. Like straight up, this is a needle that a lady would put in their hair, see? Now, a lot of you are thinking, Jake, a hair needle ain't a weapon. Dude, chopsticks could be a weapon for a very determined man. A hair needle, though, was oftentimes used by female assassins to take out a target because they didn't have to be strong enough to slit your throat or, they didn't have to cause. All they had to do was take this little end here and just shink, shink, done. Because they're putting all that pain, all that force right there on that point and just driving that in deep enough to reach something vital. That's the great thing about piercing weapons. The length of the weapon means that it'll reach something vital, whereas a slicing weapon really has to go all the way into you to hit, your heart or to sever to cut your lungs or to cut your heart. They got to go all the way in. This can just poke a hole in your chest. Now you've got a hole in your lung and you're filling with blood. So even a hair needle as a piercing weapon, deadly thing. Next, we're going to go into something for the... Oh, nope. Already talked about you. Get out of here. Something for the guys. The bullock knife. God, do I want one of these so bad. They just seem like a lot of fun. Now, the game calls it a kidney dagger, but that's because I don't think they want to call it, a dick knife. These were used not by assassins like the hair needle. These were used for dueling by bare-chested men who had an issue with one another. While it does have some slashing potential, the real upside to this weapon was its stabbing. As you can see by its well-done taper, it's a very slim profile, allowing it to get almost through a body, And what I love the most about it is that it ends in this little handguard that's literally just nuts. Doesn't aid in its stabbing potential at all to have nuts. But, if you think truck nuts are hilarious, man, knife nuts, fucking hysterical. Next, a dagger with a bit more refined taste. the Landsknecht dagger. This was used by the elite German troops. Um, and what they used this knife for was for getting in between the chainmail and the hauberks of their opponents, as well as finding gaps in plate mail. See, the people who use this dagger often use the Zweihandler. I don't have one on hand, but I can easily show you one. And they use the Zweihandler in combat. And while the Zweihandler was amazing at taking out opponents, there was one area where it suffered, and that was at piercing. See, you could. I'm just gonna stay. So you could grab it here and really drive it in, yeah. But it doesn't have a great taper at the head, so that means you're really having to crack that armor. And if this doesn't have the room to swing, because as you can tell, this is a monster weapon. This swift pull of this dagger, while long enough to definitely reach something vital, was thin enough and also wide enough that it had plenty of force to punch right in through that chain time and time again. Because as you can see, the Zweihandler is a little bit thinner than this blade is. And the reason for that is because the Zweihandler was meant to choppy, choppy, choppy. This was meant for the pokey, pokey with the ability to choppy, choppy. So it's definitely a beautiful instrument meant to do what it does really well. So now we're going to get onto our wall where we're starting to see some actual incredible variations in piercing damage. Because you're thinking, well, Jake, you can't stab with this. It's blunt on top, but it's not blunt on the side. See, piercing damage isn't just the poke. Piercing damage is anything with a tight, small surface area that can work its way through a gap in an armor, widen that armor enough to pierce it and render it null and void. And because of that, war picks were infamous. Spikes started appearing on the backs of axes. Maces were made more spiked than flanged. Polearms especially had all kinds of points on them. And we'll get to those in a moment. So we're going to start with this guy. Don't for the life of me know how to pronounce his name other than the hammer part at the end. This was an all-around anti-armor weapon. It had a blunt end for smashing the plate, smashing the head, delivering concussive force through the armor into the body, but we'll cover that in the next episode, which is blunt weaponry. Today we're going to be working on this side of it, where let's say you couldn't smack hard enough to get through that armor, or let's say you wanted to just deal direct damage. Well, this would give a man a massive concussion to the head. This would give a man a massive case of death to the head. All right, bam, right in through the armor, because all the weight of this hammer is now being put on that tiny pinpoint needle. And it's just a nasty bit of work. I keep saying that. I know I keep saying that. At this point, I'm just going to own it. It is my catchphrase. Here we've got the War Axe, one of my classical favorites. The big blade for the slicing and chopping like we talked about earlier. The good curve and the weight would allow it to cut its way through chainmail just with sheer force and weight alone. But what we're talking about today is this top point for the jabs, which made an axe incredibly versatile. Normally, axes you think swing only because you want to use that big blade. But when they started putting spikes on top of axes, it allowed an axe wielder, a warrior, to be a lot more versatile with his strikes. He no longer had to just chop. He could now also get a stab in there. He could also get those quick jabs in there. While they may not deal enough damage to instantly kill unless you hit them in like the face, that's still going to make somebody block. And then when they block, you can round the weight about into that chop, or even turn it around to really drive this bec de Corbin, which stands for beak of the crow, more commonly known as the crow's beak, but I like to call it by its actual name, the bec de Corbin. Drive that spike right in through the top of the helmet, right in through the side of the armor, right in through that plate, through that chain, through that brigandine, whatever it was, that little point is going to pierce it way better than the heavy axe blade would. Even though the heavy axe blade would deal a wider amount of damage, it wouldn't deal as much acute damage. Next, we're moving on to this bad boy. This is one of my favorite things, just because it's simple. It's essentially a big stick that somebody's like, how can I make big stick, batter? A lot of spikes with a big spike on top. You can jab with this thing. viciously because of that big spike there. But if you swing it just right and you manage to hit him with those spikes, that's a lot of pen right there. All right, that's a lot of bleeding. Maybe not the deepest damage because those spikes aren't uber long, they're maybe an inch long, but that's still a lot of bleeding because that's 3-inch deep holes in your body. That nobody's going to enjoy that. Nobody. Moving on here to the Nadzik. What I like about this is that it is both hammer and Vector Corbin. So you've got this end, which has all the weight of the steel on the other side into it for that bonky bonk. All right, my depth perception's way off, so I'm probably going to be hitting with the handle more than anything, But you've also got this little pick side that you can smack somebody with to drive the hammer weight into the armor. Handheld war picks like this were infamous in the hands of crossbowmen more than others, because crossbowmen oftentimes couldn't wear a long sword or a large sword because they had to wear more bolts and everything. So this would literally just slide in like this into their waist, and when they're when the enemy's too close for the crossbow, they drop the crossbow, pop this thing out of their pocket, just kind of shunk it up, just zoop, and then they'd have it ready to go. And it has this tiny little cross guard here that's more or less so your hand doesn't slip off the weapon than to actually block anything, because it's a little too small to really block anything. But they'd whip these little picks out and just start hacking on the enemy, because a lot of times the people that rushed crossbowmen were going to be lightly armored in sparse chainmail or lamellar armor, and while a sword may work, you really didn't want your crossbowmen dying because they're your ranged unit, dealing that long-ranged pierce damage, which again, today's all about. So they'd have these war picks to really crack through that mail so that they could just plant down, pick their crossbow back up, reload it, keep on firing. Next, we're going to get into the two swords. Then we're going to go into my three spears here. This is a returning fan favorite from last episode where I talked about how its weight and gentle taper meant that it would chop right through somebody's limbs, arms, whatever. But we're also going to talk about how its double-bladed design with a steady taper all the way to the top allows it to thrust really, really well. This thing can drive itself deep into the opponent's armor, pull itself back out, and due to its large size but well done fuller, which doesn't go all the way to the tip, it stops here so that this whole part is still a nice diamond reinforce. That tip is going to be very strong without making the entirety of the sword incredibly heavy. So that is a uber well done feature. I absolutely love it. Moving on. A sword that was like, I don't need to slice, I just need to poke. The S-stock here was a classic during the Renaissance when most opponents were wearing that heavy plate, where a sword like this, you're just going to get bogged down because you can't slice through that plate. Your only way through would be stabbing into the armpits, into the inner thighs, into the side of an opponent, in through the neck. So you don't need a big, heavy sword because that's just going to be too slow. They're going to block you all the time because all you can really do is stab. Well, the S-stock was not meant for cutting. It delivers shallow, surface-level cuts because of its incredibly light weight. But that needle tip, acting a lot like our hair needle over there, can really drive itself in through the side, in through the thighs, in through the neck, in through the arm. But because of this whole thing's construction, designed specifically to reinforce that thrust, there are rumors of S-stocks even being able to pierce through plate mail, through a dent or a weak point in plate mail. I don't know if it'll work in this game, but there are rumors of it, which made the S-stock so infamous. All right, now we're moving on to our spears. First, we've got the classic Celtic leaf spear. This was a popular one all along Britannia and Ireland for many years because its wider bell meant that the cut it inflicted was stout but wide, which was oftentimes incredibly dangerous on the battlefield because, trust me, the early Celts, Picts, and Britannians did not have surgery. So if you had a wide cut in you, you were going to bleed out long before you ever even left the battlefield. But there's a problem with this spear that this one and that one do not possess. And that's that when you stab somebody with this, because it's wider than the actual shaft, they're just going to slide all the way down to your hand. That's where the Japanese and the Europeans, I don't have the European one, I have the Japanese here one because it looks a lot cooler. The Japanese invented the winged, sorry about that, had a burp. The winged spear. The winged spear here catches on these sides. Oh my god, this thing is long. I underestimated the length of you. Holy crap. So the winged parts here to the spear, you prevent the body from sliding any further down. But thanks to the Japanese putting it here on the actual blade with the upward curve, they could also use it to catch and redirect an opponent's weapons. Now, with something this friggin' long, I don't think it would be very useful to catch an opponent's sword blade because they are all the way out there. But I do know that these swords or these spears were used infamously by cavalry because even if their initial thrust missed, if they caught your side or your limb in this little curve, it would act a lot like our Falk's blade, a lot like the Ramdo with that inverse curve here, and it would still hack that limb right off, especially if they're on horseback being driven forward with some pretty serious force. Next, we're going to get on to an absolute fustercluck of death, the Raunch. So what I love about this guy, and I'm gonna try my best to float him here for a second. There we go. What I love the most about this guy is that he has a sharp hook here, like we saw in our Forest Bill in the last episode. A good downward hook here that also helps, and this little point here, like we saw on the Cavalry Slayer, that allows that to really crack into the armor and push it to the other sides. But it's not going to cut very well because this actual curve isn't too sharp. So you really need the whole leverage of the pull arm. On the back, we've got a nice spike here, a nice square spike that's going to drive deep, and we've got a good a good spear tip point here for really driving into the body that's going to get stopped by this upward blade to act as a winged spear. But you've also got a catch here on the back just in case. This weapon is a masterpiece of death, well designed by a very smart blacksmith who wanted to functionally put as much death into one weapon as possible. Whoever came up with this design was a goddamn genius, and he has created a certifiable nasty bit of work. All right, now we're moving on to the last surprise of the night, what I'm wearing on my body. First up, we're going to go to the hips, then we're going to go to the shoulders, and then we're going to have some fun with a live demonstration. So, first up is the Gladius, the hacker and stabber of the Roman Empire. If I go ahead and grab my sweet baby here, the Tower Shield, which similar to their Scutums, not quite exact. I'd be here in my Tetsuo formation, got my shield up, my buddy next to him has his shield up. We got guys putting their shields over our heads up here. I'm going to be jabbing around the side of my shield, trying to get into cracks and crevices in the opponent without letting him through mine. That's what this whole thing was designed to do, was to stab its way through bronze armor or stab around bronze armor, slipping in and out of those cracks, while also having a decent curve and head to it to allow for hacking and slashing on the battlefield against whatever barbarians or other tribesmen we may be fighting in the glorious rise of the Roman Empire. Next, I've got something from India, the Katar. This was a push dagger before push daggers were ever a thing. I can infuse this while I wear it. That is really sweet. So as you can see, it has a double handle with a nice wide blade right here. This blade, whoop, get back here, you. So this blade was kind of thick, but still slicey enough, like thin enough to allow for decent slices off my forearm, braced with my forearm, allowing for real heavy strikes to better supplement any kind of hand-to-hand martial arts I'm using. Fun fact, these were actually used by nobility to hunt tigers for a while. The real emphasis is that punch drive. That solid punch you can get with one of these just pushes that blade through any kind of hide or armor that your opponent might be wearing. I wouldn't test it against plate because there's a good chance you'll glance, but against chainmail, leather, and scale, they done, son. Next, we're going to go to something that's both equal parts beauty and doom. This is a tabar. It's a battle axe, but as you can see, they decided to go the multi-tool route, adding a nice spearhead on top, and this corkscrew pattern on the back, or this screw pattern, not corkscrew, just regular screw. This screw pattern on the back, which, by the way, let's see if this happens first try. Yep, that just stuck itself into the ground and is driving itself under its own body weight deeper into the ground. That is how sharp that is. All right, that is a deadly weapon. One of my favorite. You saw me use it on stream here in our beautiful, beautiful classroom to dismember many a person. All right, both with axe side and with the deadly screw here, taking on all kinds of plate wearing baddies by going around the plate. But I have been able to drive this thing through plate due to the weight of the axe head behind it. On my other shoulder, I've got 100 little buddies. I've got a bundle of javelins here. Now, you guys are wondering, well, a javelin, that's 100 weapons. It's not one weapon. The reason the javelin is so infamous, guys, is because it was a throwing weapon meant to pierce, but could also double as a spear when need be. The Vikings were very famous for using these in battle. The Iberians would use these in battle. The Romans used pilum, which were a type of javelin. Javelins were a very good opener for infantry because you'd hurl them at the enemy. They'd get stuck into shields or stuck into guys and weigh them down. The Romans had a unit entirely designed just to throw javelins called the Velites and the Livies. And they would just hurl javelins all day, every day at the opponent because a javelin's weight means that it's going to do more damage than a sling rock or an arrow if it hits you. It has reduced range, but that's always the trade-off of that kind of thing. All right, we're going to get into a fight. I'm going to be summoning some bandits. We're going to go bandits 1v1, melee only. I wish to God that there was just like a bandit 1v1 here. But you could like fight 8 at once, but that's not it. And this, I'm going to have 3 coming at me at a time. Yeah. So we're just going to go 1v1 bandits on melee only, and I'll be using the slow-mo to try and teach this as I go. Just making sure that I've got infinite focus, that way I don't get interrupted. All right, first on the docket is going to be the Gladius, which was used to defeat leather-armored opponents of all shapes and sizes. So, I wait, he attacks, I come in, right in through the shoulder, right in through the neck, piercing like butter. Boom, finish to the chest. All right, we speed time back up. Oh, she is right there, right on me. I wait. Right through the chest, right through that leather armor of hers, didn't even slow me down. Because this whole thing is designed to pierce leather armor just like that. I move in through the side, in through the back, as she's falling. Absolute nasty. Now we're going to move on to the Katar. I move in, she swings, I wait for my opening. Bam! In through the side. Bam! In through the neck. And boom! A quick slice as she falls. I look around, there's my next opponent, and they got a helmet on, so I'm going to really try to go in through the side of the head. Dodge her knife, come in. Oh, I missed! Eh. Oh, I can't get a good angle on it. Yeah. Can't get a good angle. Bam! In through the chest. There's my next opponent. Going back in through. Boom! Just drove straight through her attack with that strong, solid punch. Couldn't even stop me. Alright, moving on to the javelins. He's on the approach. I throw. Blocked, but I've got another. Wait for his attack. He's open. Glancing hit. Yeah. There we go. Into the shoulder. Draw my next one to me. Come in. Boom! In through the gut. In again. See, using the length of the javelin, I can keep them at bay and hit them before they can hit me. which was beneficial when fighting sword-armed opponents. It's great for the whack as well if you can hit with the shaft, but that stab right there, that's the real finisher. And the fact that I'm carrying multiple means that I can throw them away when they get dull, or if I want to really finish off an opponent with some range. Now, I'm bad at throwing them overhand, but I'm good at throwing them downwards. That thrust right there, as you can see, goes right in. All right, we're on to our last little demonstration of the day. So I'm going to use that front tip first. As I come in, boom, hit her in the shoulder. Boom, spike the head, and then in through the body. Turn around, my next opponent's coming. I'm going to try and plant that spike right into his chest. Oh, in through his arm again. I missed. Oh, it's hard to line that up with my depth perception. Dodge it. Boom! Right into his chest. Bam! Doesn't really take a lot of force at all. The hard part's just lining that shot up. Boom! Oh, that was into the head. So as you can see, that is a deadly weapon. Even if I miss, they're still getting hit with all the blunt force weight of it. I'm gonna come back this way to the center. Alright, I saw Gladius on the floor and I thought I dropped mine. Bam! Right into his back. Into the shoulder. And again. Just, it goes right in. There's no stopping it. Woo! Now that gave her a cut because the blade on top glanced across her. If I had better depth perception, I could use that a bit more efficiently. So as you can see there, that's just how a few of our weapons are able to pierce really, really effectively. Ow, dick. Come here. Yeah, that's a nasty piercing weapon. Shouldn't be able to slice, but the game allows it to. But really, with its triangular shape like that, should not be able to slice. All right, that does it for today's episode. Class dismissed.